What is going on, guys? Brock Reads here. It's been a while since I posted a video, but I promise you I have been reading. I've actually been reading a ton lately. I'm starting what is my third book in 2 weeks. I've read 2 books in 2 week span. I had like a little bit of a hiatus there, or I was listening to books. Summertime, I always end up listening on Audible more than I read just because I'm so busy. It's just easier to plug in headphones or earbuds and just listen while I'm working or while I'm doing stuff outside of the office or outside of home. But I've actually been reading mostly on my Kindle. And so we're going to get into a book that was highly recommended, highly praised by a YouTube channel called 2toRamble. Love those guys. Their podcast format and what they do and ideas for their videos is just incredible. Someday I would love to do something similar to that episodically, not completely copy them. But the book is sort of Kaigen, if you were wondering. They, as a standalone book, they rate this book very highly. They love this book. They just rant and rave about it. And when I've listened to their videos, I haven't listened to all their videos, but when I've listened to their videos, they've talked highly about it. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to read it at some point. It was on my TBR. And then I got like a Kindle notification about deals, and this book was super cheap. So I picked it up and I read it, and wow, did it absolutely change the way that I look at books. But we're going to get into a detailed review. There might be slight spoilers. I'm going to try not to talk necessarily specifically to spoilers, though I think it's been out a while, and I think a lot of people can have read it by now. I feel like the time period for being sensitive to spoilers might be kind of over, but I'm going to do my best not to necessarily get completely into it. Also know that with some of the names and places and things, I'm not going to remember off the top of my head necessarily, or I'm not going to pronounce them correctly. So that being said, I have 10 categories in which I'm going to review this, the criteria that I'm going to use to review this book. And it is going to be plot/storyline, characters, writing style and prose, pacing, world building/setting, themes/messages, emotional impact, original creativity, ending resolution, enjoyment, and entertainment value. I'm going to rate them out of 10, so that way we get a final score out of 100. That is kind of how I like to do things, because I feel like if you limit it to like 5-star rating overall, it's just hard to get to the nuances of every little detail. So that's why there's so many categories. And at the end of it, there's going to be a score out of 100, and that's just kind of the way that it's going to be. So with that being said, we are going to start off with plot and storyline. I'm going to open up another document so I write down what the ratings are going to be so I don't forget as time goes on, and it'll help me in post to be able to edit that on the screen for you as we continue on. So that being said, we're going to start with plot/storyline. I was not blown away by the plot, the main plot of the distrusting the government, an enemy that's actually secretly building up strength, all that different stuff wasn't necessarily like mind-blowing. I'm not saying it's bad by any means. You're just looking at something that I didn't feel like was a mind-blowing concept, if that makes sense. I loved the storyline, however, of the shattering worldviews, then building up into what you will choose to believe when that happens. That storyline, and maybe that ties into theme a little bit, but the storyline was really cool to me in that sense, and the trajectory that they went, like the plot of distrusting government, military warrior focus was super cool. And the plot for each character, just different story arcs, which we're going to get into the details of the character story arcs later as we talk about it. But the overall plot was not mind-blowing to me. But when you pick that kind of a plot, the direction you go with it in the storyline was really, really awesome to me. It was engaging because the stakes that were what was at stake. I don't know, because I haven't read as much as maybe some other individuals, so I don't know if there's other books that have similar storylines, but I feel like, especially in recent years, the stories, movies, and so on that are written from a point of view of distrusting the government's lying to you, didn't feel the most original in that sense, but the storyline felt original, if that makes sense. The way that they navigated the plot felt original, but the plot itself didn't feel original. And predictability, I definitely predicted some of the things that were going to happen, but when you get into the minute plot points of characters and so on, it definitely was not as predictable as I thought. So with that being said, I would say it was definitely above average, but it wasn't mind-blowing. So I really think that this is going to be one of the weakest points of sort of Kaigen. If you separate everything else, which it's so hard to do, to separate a book into categories, because when you judge it just on that pure category, it seems like it's less than what it is, because I do think this is a great book. But for this category, and in that scale of 1 to 10, like 1 being terrible, 10 being perfect, 5 is average for me. Okay, 5 is average. I'm trying to be very harsh on this scale. So to really get close to 10 is really difficult, depending on the category. So I just want that to speak highly to people. I'm using this new scaling system, so hopefully it works. Give me feedback in the comments what you think of this criteria and this rating system that I'm using. But I'm going to have to give it like a 6.5 out of 10. That's kind of where I settled at this. It's above average. The way that they developed the plot, the way that it continues on, but the plot itself in its predictability as well as original idea wasn't anything mind-blowing, but the way they navigated in the storyline in the plot definitely gets it above average, but I don't think it was something that was just unbelievably mind-bending for me. Next, we have characters being developed, relatable, dynamic, changing, do they make sense, and so on and so forth. This is probably one of the strongest points of this book. I think I definitely had a little bit of a bias going in as I started to read it. I'm not a huge fan of like teen storytelling, younger teens, or perspective from a child standpoint or teen standpoint, unless it's like upper teens or young adult or adult. I like that perspective more. I don't know why. I've kind of always been that way, even when I was a teenager. I just don't love those storylines. An exception to the rule for me has always been Stranger Things. It's one of the only storylines where it takes the perspective of a teenager or younger kids, where I've been like, yeah, that was great. But when you look at something like Avatar: Last Airbender, hot take, not my favorite, because I just don't enjoy those characters as much. I find more of the annoyances outweigh the positives from that perspective in those characters. So Mamoru, like I said, that's my bias going into this. And so Mamoru, which I think I pronounced incorrectly, was a character that I was a little nervous reading from his perspective, but I think it ended up being a phenomenal perspective, and how he was developed and what he went through, I think was really great storytelling. Really great themes in that, which again, we'll get to themes and messaging later, but it was just well developed. It was relatable. And I felt like he went through transformation and change, being from like this blindly loyal. Well, he wasn't blindly loyal. He just thought he was being told the truth and he was loyal. And then worldview shattered, and then lost, like when he duels his dad after saying the things he did about the emperor and the news that they saw, and his father says, fine, then fight on your words then. And he's teaching him a lesson of, you need to have your why. You need to have your why to be able to stand up and fight for it. And I think that was a cool moment, because his worldview shattered and he was lost. And then he ends up finding that as he's going into battle. And I love that. I loved that storyline and the development of it. Getting to the other main character, Misaki. Oh my word. This is probably one of my favorite characters in fiction. I think this is exactly how you write a strong female character. It wasn't some feminist garbage. It was a genuine, you have strength. no matter what you're doing. And because we get the flashbacks of her being this warrior fighting crime, but then she takes on the role of being a housewife and raising the kids and doing this, which is that somewhat in their culture it was written as this oppressive nature to her, which it was. I mean, it is. But she still had strength in that. Like, you would think that a lot of stories that would tell that perspective, right? That would tell the perspective of once a warrior becomes a housewife, she would seem weak. But even as the housewife, she had strength. It took strength to take that on. And I loved that message in it, that it actually is a strong position and strength in that role, even if it's different from the warrior status. And then her development to get back to warrior status and having to do that and being forced into it, yet still doing it. And then eventually getting to the place where everything that's built up to this moment in anger and frustration and fighting back against the oppression that she's experienced from her husband and culture, and the duel she has with her husband, to take that opportunity and again, justified in her response to probably end him, she instead chooses strength to build him up. Like, she shares the truth that breaks him, but it also is the truth that sets him free, and then takes that opportunity to uplift him to where he's supposed to be, while also teaching him that he doesn't need to be this oppressive person. Like, that takes an insane amount of strength. That being a warrior was not the be-all, end-all of strength. I loved that in this book, that strength was defined so many ways. And that was developed in Misaki's storyline beyond everybody else's. And she is one of the greatest written characters, and what really carried the book for me in every possible way. The other side characters, I think, were all very good. I can't remember Misaki's husband's first name, so I just call him Mr. Matsuda. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. But the storylines of all these different side characters and him and what they go through and the development and the change, and then Hiyori, like a lot of characters in most books, you see the transformation of the character become something greater, that they're becoming better. They're becoming who they were meant to be. Whereas Hiyori goes through the opposite. She deteriorates throughout the book, and it's heartbreaking and heart-wrenching. Yet at the same time, I think it was important to have that. It was very important to have that in the story. There's one character that I would say a little bit negative on is in the beginning of the book, Mamoru, the new kid that he befriends, kind of befriends, and they end up becoming close with. He was such like a main character in the very beginning, and then I feel like as the book developed, he just kind of disappeared. And that is fine, but it just felt like all of a sudden he's just gone. And so I didn't know what to think of that. I wouldn't say it's some giant negative thing, but what is going on with my hair up here? Let's calm down. Anyway, so for characters, so I don't go on too long, I'm giving it a 9 out of 10 for sure. The characters and the character development, the dynamicness of them was 100%, 1000% the basis of this book, and the incredible standard for this book that carried it for its entirety, in my opinion. So next we get to writing style and prose. Which prose is like a touchy topic, because I'm not the most knowledgeable on literature and the way that you should be writing everything and how it's supposed to sound and prose and all these different things. I'm not the most educated in all of this. But the definition that I'm kind of going off of, or standard within this, is, was the writing clear, beautiful, or clunky? Like, was this difficult to read, or was this easy to read? And not easy to read in the sense that they used a bunch of big words, because I think at times in this book they did use bigger words that maybe not everybody would know, or you have to look up the definition of. But they used them at the right times, and was the flow good? I compare this to a book like Red Rising, where I found myself having to reread sentences multiple times because the way they were constructed or formed just made it hard for me to read. Like, it felt clunky. It felt like I'm tripping over this sentence structure. Whereas Sword of Kaigen, I didn't have that at all. This was actually a very easy read. The hardest part was remembering characters because they're using names from this culture that they're building, this Asian-inspired culture. And I'm not familiar with those. That's not my everyday life. Being in America, you know names John, Brittany, Sarah, blah, 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 Naomi. Like, these are names that you just hear every day. Whereas in this book, these are not names I hear every day. So when I would be reading it, and if it's a side character that's not brought up a lot, I'd be like, wait, who is that again? And it would make me pause. And that's not necessarily like a flaw in the book. I'm just saying it stunted the smoothness of the reading process for me, but overall the book was a smooth read. It went down fine. I didn't have any problems with it. It wasn't something that I felt like was spectacular by any means, but overall, as far as the smoothness of the read, I would give it an 8 out of 10. And the only reason why it's not higher is just because of some of the confusion when you have so many names and you're bringing people up and you're not bringing them up enough. Sometimes that was like a halting moment of, wait, who is this again? And then like their measurements of time, Dinma, like it took me a while to realize, oh, that's just their measure of time. I didn't know that. I didn't understand that. Some of that stuff was just a little bit halting as I read and made it a little bit bumpy, but overall was really, really smooth. Next is pacing. The pacing of this book. In the beginning, I would say it was at the right pace as you're world building. There was a couple moments where it felt draggy when we're getting a little bit of information dump. Though I love information dumping in a school setting. I think it's a very natural place to do that. Like when a teacher is just teaching things. I think that's a very easy way to info dump, and I think it makes sense because also if you've ever been in school, that's normal for the teacher to just monologue and info dump. Like that's normal. So like when you have a school setting and they do that, I know some people don't like it because it's info dumping, but it's the best excuse for info dumping, I should say. And so it didn't feel completely out of place. Through the middle of it, there was one night where I read 200 pages of this book because the pacing was so when they get into the fight and all of a sudden I'm reading through pages and pages, I'm like, this is the same battle and it's been going on forever, but I didn't feel like it's dragging forever. I just felt like, oh my word, the intensity, we're moving along, and it didn't feel like it was dragging. I feel like it inched towards dragging, but it wasn't dragging. It was right in the sweet spot. If you just had like a gauge like this, like it's getting close to dragging, but it stayed in the sweet spot. For me, the only thing in pacing that was tough was the flashbacks and the timing of the flashbacks. I love flashbacks, but you're trying to catch up on a plot without the same info dumping and understand what's going on while you're also trying to wrap your mind around what previously was going on in the other chapter. And it just felt like all of a sudden, if you were driving down a highway and you're going like 90 down a highway, which you shouldn't do, right? But let's just say you're driving 90 down a highway and then all of a sudden, e-brake, got to take this exit. That's what it felt like with some of the flashbacks. And it definitely made the pacing a little bit awkward for me. So pacing, I would probably put more at like a 7 out of 10. I didn't feel like we were pushing too fast. The end of the book felt like we were trying to wrap up quickly. I will say that. It definitely felt like the whole book build up, then your middle climax felt like it lasted forever and it was so intense. And then the end of the book just felt like it was quick stop kind of a thing for me. And so that's why I probably don't give it any higher than a 7 out of 10. But overall, I think the book was very good to read and the pacing wasn't a negative. It was above average. Next is world building / setting. I loved the world that they built. It was immersive. It was so cool. I love that it's like a mix of modern and old school. I loved that concept that there's TVs, there's technology, yet we're still like samurai swords and living life more in that way. Like it was just a cool concept to me. I'm a sucker for it, so it really hit well with me. Again, the info dumping is where a lot of the world building got, and maybe because I knew that it was a standalone, I didn't care as much. Like the fact that I knew going into it that there was no second book, it definitely took away, I think, from the world building, because I found myself with some of the info dumping more speed reading it, not being too worried about picking up on certain things. Like I would read it and be like, okay, I don't really have to remember that. And then I would look for main points. I'm not saying I completely skim read it. I did read this book detailed, but the world building didn't feel as important to me. And then with the flashbacks, not that you had to build the world, but when they referenced some of these other cities and places and things going on, there was some info about them, but it felt like we were missing a bit of information. And again, knowing that it's standalone, that's not a big deal, but it just, for me, it takes away from world building a bit. But the setting was awesome. I loved the concept of the sword of Kaigen. We are the sword of Kaigen. Like you're the defending spot. I did. I loved that. It was immersive. It was a easy thing to imagine. So I got to give the world building an 8 out of 10. And the setting, I think it's super awesome. Themes slash messages. I definitely think this book explored deeper ideas, the deep ideas of loss, the deep ideas of worldviews being shattered, choosing what you're going to believe, and the concept of you need to know your why in order to stand for anything in this world. Otherwise, everything is going to knock you over. And I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with these days, is you don't have a solid why you're doing what you're doing, which is why every podcast, every book, every whatever you read, all of a sudden knocks you over here, and you're not standing firm on your beliefs. I think it explored that concept. It explored the concept of, like I said, with Misaki being what is a woman, like being a strong woman. And she demonstrated that you could be strong as a housewife or as a warrior. And both of those are true. Like being a housewife and take care of the kids does not mean you are a weak, feeble individual. If that's how they treat you, maybe, but it doesn't mean you are. And I loved that theme. I love that they explored that, being a good wife, ultimately, even when your husband has been terrible. Like what that looks like is not just dump him and kill him. Like our culture today is divorce them if they suck. But her equivalent of that would have been killing him in the duel. But she doesn't do that. She uplifts him. And so like, I think you fix that, and what is honor, and what is genuinely loyalty. And then also when dealing with hurt and offense, because we look at them and we see how hurt they were by the emperor, being lied to, coming in, not giving them aid, and then maybe going to give them aid. How did they respond to it? They said, no, it's okay. We'll just do it ourselves. Appreciate it. Long live the emperor. Like they showed respect, but we're going to do it ourselves. Don't worry about it. Like that's the proper way to do it. Instead of just going scorched earth like so many of us would have done, the theme of how to deal with when you've been lied to and treated poorly is, yeah, okay, that's fine. Just distance yourself from them without making a big deal. And I loved that. There's so many themes and deeper things about this. But as far as the theme goes, it didn't leave me sitting in a chair when I finished the book. It didn't leave me sitting there like, oh my word, I'm rethinking my entire life. No, it just had really good thoughts and themes in it. And I really appreciated that in this book. And so again, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10 for themes and messages. I think it was super awesome. Emotional impact. This is where this book, I think, is phenomenal. Like I can't describe it any other way. It's just a phenomenal book. The excitement, the tensity, the suspense. That's why, like, in one night I read like 200 pages, and then the next night I read like 100 some, is because I'm like struggling to put it down, because I'm like, I need, what is going to happen? What is going to happen? I need to know what's going to happen. Like, what is going on? I'm struggling here. And who's going to die, who's going to live, all these different things that were so concerning, that had an emotional impact on me. I probably would have cried multiple times in this book had I not been reading it like around my wife, because then she would have been like, what are you doing? What's going on? But I think the emotional impact of this book was insane. I mean, it did. For some, you just care about the characters, and you want to know what's going to happen, and what they end up doing. Like I said, the Hiyori storyline was beyond sad. Even Misaki's storyline had sadness in it, but then it also had peace and how to deal with loss and how to deal with these things. Then Mr. Matsuda having to deal with what he had to deal with, and just so many different things about it that I think were super awesome and definitely left an emotional impact. But it wasn't something that was just lingering forever. So a solid, this book was so sad at times. I will say, I shouldn't say never. There wasn't a ton of moments where I felt an unbelievable satisfaction, which is okay when it comes to the theme, but is not necessarily going to be a pro or a positive when it comes to emotional impact. Like, there was a couple moments where I'm like, yes, victory. Like, you did that. But there was also moments where I felt like, oh, I really wanted more. I did. I wanted the sense of, oh yeah, we punched them back. And I didn't necessarily feel that as much as I hoped for. And so with the emotional impact, there's, like I said, great at making you feel sad, which it doesn't mean that a book has to make you feel happy and sad. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying the moments where there was supposed to be a satisfaction, the moments where there was supposed to be satisfaction, it didn't feel as great as how hard-hitting the sad moments were, which they don't have to balance each other out. I'm just saying I think the sad things and the dark things and the deep things were written so well, whereas the satisfying moments weren't necessarily written as well or made an impact. So 7.5 out of 10 for emotional impact. We got 3 left, guys. Originality and creativity. This is not something that I have to talk about very long. I think the modern and old school mix in this setting, in this world, was extremely awesome. Again, I have not read an insane array of books. I've really only started reading this year. So some of you might be able to say, well, there's 100 million other books that have the same idea. Maybe that's the case. I don't know that because I haven't read that much. So for me, this was original in so many aspects. The being able to control, like, there's earth, wind, fire, basically, kind of a thing. That's not the most original idea. The plot wasn't the most original idea. We kind of talked about that, but how they navigated the plot, what ends up happening for individual characters was very creative and amazing storytelling. But I don't think there was an insane amount of originality in this. It was just a creative spin on other ideas. So that's where, again, I'm probably going to give it one of its lower points. I'm going to give it, I don't really want to do that. I'm struggling here because I don't want to be negative on this book. But when you break it down into these categories, this is what makes it feel real, and you got to talk about it. And I'm struggling with this one because I want to say it's above average. It's probably a 6 out of 10. So it's lowest category score yet. Ending/resolution. Satisfying, rushed, or disappointing. I made notes on what each category kind of means so I can keep my brain on task of what I want to gauge it off of. Ending and resolution. Obviously, knowing that it's a standalone and it's not going to be continued definitely made the ending feel a little bit dissatisfied. But with how things ended and wrapped up and the story wrapped up and so on, it was good. I didn't like her former lover, Robin. I didn't like him coming in and their whole dialogue and their whole connection and what happened between them. I got to be honest, I wasn't a huge fan. I just really wasn't. That part of the story was not my favorite. It just felt like yeah, we just threw this in here to set up the sequel, but we're not giving you a sequel. So that was like, okay, then I feel like it was pointless. I would have rather had Mr. Matsuda and Misaki just spend time together and dialogue and see more on that. You know what I mean? And then shock value of Hiyori and what happened and the struggle and everything like that. I think it was good, but it wasn't great. Again, another weak point for me. Oh man, the ending and resolution, the resolution of like the loss and Misaki and her husband, like all that was really good. And I think that part was above average. But then the setting up and the Robin stuff and all that stuff brings it down quite a bit. So I got to give the ending and resolution a 5.5. Just because of the Robin scene, I just didn't like him being there. I didn't like that. It's in there just to set up the sequel. That's never going to happen. So I did not love that. Very last, the overall enjoyment and entertainment value. This is going to be probably its highest or second highest or tied for the highest looking at this list. Point. The book was phenomenal. I mean, it just overall was. It was great. I loved every aspect of it. I think it was extremely enjoyable. I don't think there's much else I could say. I would recommend this book to everybody. The book, I mean, it just tackles so many things, and they're so great and awesome. And I loved it every second of reading it, even though there was points where I'm like, oh, I don't love this part. I know that literally just contradicted the sentence I said, but even through like my least favorite part of like Robin being there at the end, it still was like, oh, this is, I like that we're getting resolved. The problem I had with it was that we're not getting the second book. And so it just makes it feel pointless. But overall, it was still, I liked parts of it with the resolution between him and Misaki. I just didn't like the storytelling and the random bits of information that popped out of nowhere. Beside the point, even at its worst moment for me, it still was great and enjoyable. It's going to get a... This one is, would I recommend it to somebody, basically? My overall enjoyment. Would I recommend this book to somebody? It's got to be a 9.5 out of 10. I would 100% recommend this to just about anybody or everybody that I meet. So out of the 10 categories, you know, this is what we're looking at. It's incredible. For plot and storyline, gave it a 6.5. Characters, 9 out of 10. Writing style and prose, 8 out of 10. Ease of reading. Pacing, 7 out of 10. World building and setting, 8 out of 10. Themes and messaging, 8 out of 10. 7.5 for emotional impact. Originality and creativity, a 6 out of 10. Ending and resolution, a 5.5 out of 10. And then overall enjoyment, would I recommend this to somebody? 9.5 out of 10. So that brings us to, I got to bring out my calculator. The score out of 100, my new rating system. We ready? A 75 out of 100. I definitely thought it would have been higher than that. I'm not going to lie. With how much I enjoyed the book, I really feel like it should be higher than that. I'm going to be honest, but that's why I did the rating system this way. Is I'm breaking it down in categories that I'm going to be honest about each one, and then at the end it puts it all together for me. So a 75 out of 100, certified by Brock reads. That is how I feel about The Sword of Kaigen. Absolutely love this book. Excited to share it with other people, and hopefully you read it. Let me know in the comments below what you thought. I appreciate you guys. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. We'll catch y'all later. Peace out. See you next time.